Months after 9/11, Israel was caught spying again on the United States through Department of Defense employee Lawrence Franklin, who worked out of an office which met with Israeli generals and was run by Douglas Fief, another PNAC author. Fief is a profiteer whose company, Fief & Zell, is partners with an Israeli settler, Mark Zell. The law firm got to delegate reconstruction contracts in Iraq. The Israelis were visiting the Department of Defense without having to sign in and going straight to Fief's office, where the secretive Office of Special Plans was headed. The same office Larry Franklin worked for, who was sentenced to 12 years in jail for spying for AIPAC, the Israeli lobby. Why were Israeli generals visiting a secretive group under the Office of the Clean Break and PNAC authors, where an Israeli spy was also caught red-handed? And none of it ever made the news media. In fact, normal intelligence channels weren't even aware that Fief's secret office existed.
I'd have to interject something similar to what I said to Senator Feinstein. To a lot of the analysts working these issues, we weren't aware of what was going on up there, whether it was the vice president or somebody else. To give you an illustration, I didn't even know about the existence of the Fief office in the Pentagon until maybe 6-7 months before the war. And the way I found out about the existence of Mr. Fief's office, because somebody who worked on terrorism in our bureau showed me a product produced by that office. As I recall, it was 2 pages long. And it was the evidence linking Iraq with terrorism. And the person was giving it to me effectively as comic relief, saying, "Can you believe what's on this paper?" It was as if I had gotten my morning traffic someday, because there's a lot of junk in intelligence that the analyst knows that has to be sifted out to get to the real kernels, and it looked like an unsorted pile of junk. And this is one reason the Fief office, which does relate to the Secretary of Defense and then to others, becomes extremely important. I didn't go into it in what I read here. It's in my written testimony. Those kinds of nodes and offices must be completely eliminated because people aren't even aware of them. There aren't standard communications between them and the rest of the intelligence community. And more importantly, there has been no vetting of their personnel, whatsoever, for professionalism, for experience in that field. That office basically was writing intelligence, which was getting far more attention than a lot of what Carl and I, were working on, and yet it had none of the professional standards, that it applied to the rest of the intelligence community. And it was so low profile, if you didn't know what was going on behind the scenes, to many of us it was utterly invisible until the last moments.
Congressman Jones, if I can extend what Wayne White mentioned with regard to the detached nature of some of what was going on in the Office of Secretary of Defense and Office of Vice President, what this little group under Mr. Fief was doing and trying to come up with all the scraps, trying to show a link with Al-Qaeda, they did put together a briefing, which was briefed out at Langley to Mr. Tennant and to members of the Counterterrorist Center. Again, I wasn't working on counterterrorism at the time. I didn't receive the briefing. That group wasn't established because the intelligence community wasn't doing its job. It was doing its job rather intensively and devoting a great deal of effort, particularly the Counterterrorist Center. Again, I wasn't in it at the time, to this whole issue of Iraq and Al-Qaeda because they were asked so many questions again and again and again and again and again. So they wrote a bunch of papers. It wasn't that they didn't do the good analysis or come up with the specific evidence. It's that the policymakers, these particular ones in the Office of Secretary of Defense, didn't like the answer. And the answer was, there's no alliance. And that was a very well-documented answer. And there was a lot of other information that pointed in an opposite direction from all these scraps that Mr. Fief's office put together and we later read about in the Weekly Standard. Evidence that showed, for example, that there was not training going on, that there were not contacts between Iraq and just about any Islamist you could come up with in Afghanistan. That was all the other side that was ignored.
Fief's office was passing classified information to Israel through AIPAC employees Keith Wiseman and Steve Rosen. The man passing the documents, Lawrence Franklin, was sentenced, but the people receiving the information didn't get in any trouble after threatening to narc on everyone else who was involved, which included the majority of the Bush administration. Doug Fief, working under the Zionist madman, the Prince of Darkness, Richard Pearl, ran a special office in the Department of Defense called the Office of Special Plans. Oh, he was special, all right. The OSP had a mirror group in Israel and both met with Israeli generals. Feith's special cabal did a lot worse than cherry-pick intelligence. They flat out fabricated it.
The most frequent and damaging charge has been that Feith used his Pentagon office to produce alternative intelligence reports that link Saddam to al-Qaeda, then passed them on to the White House. Some of it, like a report that 9/11 hijacker Mohammed Atta met with Iraqi intelligence in Prague, has been widely discredited. One of the reasons people were told we were going to war in Iraq was because an imminent attack with weapons of mass destruction was about to happen.
I don't believe anybody in the U.S. government said that.
This is Donald Rumsfeld. Iraq poses a serious and mounting threat to our country.
No terrorist state poses a greater or more immediate threat to the security of our people and the stability of the world than the regime of Saddam Hussein.
The Iraqi regime is a threat to any American.
There is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction. There is no doubt that he is amassing them to use against our friends, against our allies, and against us.
Feith's office took PNAC's old lies as well as their new lies and presented them as intelligence. These were not mistakes, they were deceptions. PNAC wrote the script. To understand why, I drive home the point that PNAC was the central hub for creating a case for war in Iraq, just have a look at some of their policy papers. These quotes are in their own words from their own website, and the authors, who also wrote Israeli policy papers stating the same things, wrote exactly what became the free invasion rhetoric to invade Iraq. Feith with Pearl set up something called IAI, the International Advisors Incorporated, in Turkey to act as a miniature ATC. Feith was a sole shareholder. It is essentially just another bubble to profiteer through. It's odd how the U.S. wrongly points his finger at Iraq, and even Iran, accusing them of building nuclear weapons, and yet the real criminals trading nuclear secrets and possibly nuclear material are right here in our own government. Our Undersecretary of State and former ambassador to Turkey, Mark Grossman, is implicated in just such a crime. And even though he'd been caught red-handed with these dealings with the Turks and the Israelis, nothing could be done about it because the whistleblowers were gagged. To quote an old write-up from Justin Raimondo, one of the best muckrakers out there, immediately after 9/11, the FBI arrested a bunch of people suspected of being involved with the attacks, including 4 associates of key targets of FBI counterintelligence operations. Sibel heard the targets tell Mark Grossman, "We need to get them out of the U.S. because we can't afford them to spill the beans." Grossman duly facilitated their release from jail, and the suspects immediately left the country without further investigation or interrogation. That's the number 3 man at the State Department facilitating the immediate release of 9/11 suspects at the request of targets of the FBI's investigation. It would be Mark Grossman who warned his associates to stay away from Brewster Jennings, a front for the CIA, particularly the wing that Valerie Plame was working for, which worked on tracking nuclear weapons proliferation. This became more public knowledge when Novak and Louis Libby told the world to stay away from Brewster Jennings and associates by ousting Valerie Plame as a covert agent. By ousting her, it was easy to deduce that the company she worked for must have been a front, and thus all of the CIA agents working for that were gone. They're pointing the finger at Iraq and Iran, but we know which country in the Middle East secretly has nukes. We know which cabal within the United States is selling this information on the black market, and it's in our own government. It's Feith and Pearl and Grossman and the same PNAC Zionist traitors that have led to the war in Iraq, helped cover up Niger, ousted Valerie Plame, and blackmailed politicians for their own financial interest. Not only were they selling nuclear secrets, they were also selling hooking points, soft spots for blackmail, to manipulate U.S. officials. Oddly, a male hooker, Jeff Gannon, who Karl Rove brought in, who was pretending to be part of a fake news agency, Talon News, made references to internal government memos about the Plame affair before they went public. This is a male hooker spending the night at the White House. I wonder how he got access to that information.